John 3:16 has been called the most famous verse in the New Testament or the Bible. It is certainly known by many that God loved the world, but did we notice the "for"? John 3:16, "For God so loved the world," connects to a previous passage. What if we took a look at this Bible verse in its own flow of thought? I know some of us may have personal histories with Bible verses, and those histories cannot be denied. But let's listen in on how John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have eternal life," how that verse fits within the flow of thought. We already mentioned the "for." The "for" connects it right back to the story of Nicodemus, and we will be looking at Nicodemus in depth later on. But at this moment, it is good to realize that Nicodemus was Israel's teacher, and therefore Jesus, in loving Nicodemus, contextualizes concepts so that Nicodemus can understand. He's supposed to understand this story from the Old Testament, that just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, verse 14, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in Him. That's the end of Jesus' words. And now John, the writer of the Gospel, says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son." So John writes from the perspective of having seen Jesus on the cross. And the connection that Nicodemus is supposed to get is that without the lifting up of the snake, without the snake being on a pole in that desert experience, people would not get relief from their bite. And so also the world. The world will perish. It will perish unless they believe in Jesus Christ, the lifted up one, and therefore have eternal life. So these themes, eternal life and the world, they all have been introduced to us, and we'll be looking at more in depth how they are introduced and developed. So take, for example, this literary context where the gospel starts not with the world, but before the world, in the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We go back to creation, and just like in creation, God brought out of nothing something and shaped, we are going back there to be taught that this Word, He was with God, and the Word was God. And this Word became flesh. We're obviously talking about Jesus Christ, verse 14, "and made His dwelling among us." Who's the us? Not us right here, us in history and time. So we see the timeline moving from before the world to the creation of the world, because it says nothing was created. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. And in Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. So we see that the story here in John chapter 3, verse 16, has a beginning before the world began, and then it has a specific incarnation in Israel. And in Israel, Jesus, in chapter 2, verse 1, introduces Himself with changing water into wine, the first of 7 signs in the Gospel of John. John chapter 3 verse 16 is within this context where there was a lack of wine, and Jesus took about 150 gallons of water and changed it into good quality wine. The idea would be, look, the way that Jesus acts is with abundance and with generosity, and He inaugurates that which He is announcing with such fanfare, it's sufficient. There's sufficient to go around for the whole world. We pick up again on Cana, where that's where the first sign occurred, in chapter 4, verse 46, when the second sign occurs, healing of the official son. In this video series, we're going to be looking at this first sign and its surrounding implications for us to understand how Jesus Christ can be taken to our cities, how we understand loving our cities. What does that mean? What it means to love the people around us. Who's this world? In the next video, I will go a little bit more in depth on the idea of the world. What should we expect when we think of the world? What should we think of? What frame of mind should we have? If you got it, that the literary context of John 3:16 gives us more dimensions, more insight in how we are to love our cities, you're right. There is a particular setting to understand John 3:16 in, and we'll unpack some of these. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.